with us today, and we're excited that it's Mother's Day and that we can share in that time together. Today's message titled Hearts Wide Open. And it's a loving look at our mothers. And in many ways, that's what we get with our mothers, isn't it? We get women who have their hearts wide open to us, who don't hold anything back. A good mother is one who loves her children and loves her husband in a way that is just incredible. That is a way that just shows us everything that she can be. I want to tell you a little bit about Calvin's mom. And for those of you in the church who are thinking, oh, you mean Klein and Gracie's mom? That's not the Calvin I'm talking about. I'm talking about in the comic strip, Calvin and Hobbes, and Calvin's mother. Now, if you know that strip at all, you know that Calvin is this very imaginative 6-year-old who believes that his pet tiger Hobbes is alive and uses him in all different sorts of imaginary adventures. But another thing about Calvin is he really doesn't fit in with other kids. He's obnoxious, he's ornery, he's stubborn, he's very much self-focused, very disobedient. Quite frankly, he's a child that makes almost everybody around him, including the babysitter and others, crazy. And even though he frustrates his mother, even though he does things that just, put her teeth on edge, one thing that is always clear in this strip is that his mother really, really loves Calvin. And when push comes to shove and even dad gets so frustrated that maybe he steps a little bit out of line in his treatment of Calvin, the mother is like, Calvin's mom is like a mother bear. I mean, she's right there in his face because she loves Calvin and she's going to protect him. And there's always this sign of tenderness, this love, this, no matter what he does, she's still his mom. We're going to talk about moms like that today. We're going to talk about moms like Calvin's who have their hearts wide open. But before we go any further, let's pray. Father God, just thank you so much for our mothers. Thank you so much for our wives. And Lord, as we come before you today and we open your word to see some of your descriptions of a wife and a mom, we just ask, Lord, that you open your word to us afresh in a new and exciting way, a way that we can see new truths. Lord, may your spirit be the guide, the teacher, as we explore this. May we learn to appreciate just what the precious gift you've given us in mothers are or is. Help us, Lord, to truly understand what a blessing they are. And through the process, Lord, let us glorify you because you're the giver of them. In Christ's name, amen. Motherhood. I happen to be a father, so it's really hard for me to talk about motherhood. But motherhood, from what I have observed of it, has to be the world's hardest job to do well. Now, you may think, well, what about brain surgery? Or what about some of the really intricate, different scientific things? And I tell you, a mother does the hardest job because she has to fulfill many different roles. It's not just one thing that she's doing, one thing she can focus on. There's so many different aspects to motherhood. She's a comforter. The child is hurt, cut his knee. Who does he run to? He runs to his mom for comfort. The mother is the confidant. She's the one that the child shares the first secrets with. When, it's like, I like this boy or I like this girl or whatever, oftentimes it's the mother that hears. or the dreams, the aspirations of the child. Maybe the secret fears. The mother's the confidant. The mother's also the playmate. Oftentimes, when a child doesn't have anybody to play with, maybe it's a rainy day, oftentimes it's the mom who steps in. She's the playmate. I know with my own mother, we played dominoes. We played other games. We watched TV together. We did various things like that, when no one else was around, because that was one of the roles that she fulfilled. Mother's a friend. Sometimes your best friend, sometimes the one that you can turn to when you really need to talk to somebody. She's your companion on those days when you're taking a walk, or maybe you're just wanting to hang out with somebody. Maybe you're sick and you're in bed, and the person who stays with you oftentimes, that's the mom. She's the companion. She's the protector when things get rough. When I remember one time I was in a car with my mother, and some people in front of us were looking like they were going to be rude, and they might decide to even get out of the car and come toward us. My mother, small woman that she was eagerly reading their license plate and making it known that she was doing that, so she could report them to the police, and they took off in a blast. Mothers, even when they are physically weak or whatever, sometimes they're the protector, the fiercest protector of the child. The mother's the guide, the one who navigates through life's treacherous waters with her child. Mother's the teacher, often better teacher than you find in school, teaching practical skills, but also life skills, life values. A good mother is a nurturer, one who brings along her children, helps grow them into the men and women they will one day become. Mother's a counselor, one that you can talk to and share your problems with, and who will give you good advice. A mother's a provider, the cookies, the snacks, the different things that you need during the day. When you're sick, the one who brings you your cough syrup or your medicine, the one who buys you the new clothes a lot of times and makes sure that you're bundled up warmly when you go outside. So many different things that she fulfills. She's also a sounding board. When you need to bounce an idea off of a dream or a fear, she's the one who will listen. She's the shoulder to cry on when you're going through all the struggles that are common to humanity. She's the one oftentimes that you turn to. She's the lap to curl up in when you're scared, or when you just need that extra little bit of love. She's a shelter in the storm when life just gets too crazy out there for you. And even when you're older and you've maybe gone to college, or maybe you're out on your own, she's a person to run home to, a person that you can rely on, that no matter what, her door is open. You see, God gave her a sacrificial heart, a heart that is willing to make great sacrifices, to go to great means to take care of her child. Deuteronomy 22:6 tells us, if you come across a bird's nest beside the road, either in a tree or on the ground, and the mother is sitting on the young or on the eggs, do not take the mother with the young. Now, you might say, well, that's an interesting passage. I'm not really sure how that relates, but look at the mother here. What does a bird normally do when somebody gets close, a hunter gets close? They run, right? They fly away. But in this case, the mother is sitting on the young or on the eggs, and the instruction is not to take the mother with the young. The implication is the mother's there. The mother stays. Well, why doesn't the mother flee? Well, in some cases, you do see a mother flee, but usually the mother bird doesn't flee very far. She pretends, some birds, for example, pretend that, they're hurt, and they try to draw the hunter away from the eggs. Others attack. If you get too close to their eggs, they attack. Most mother birds, in fact, most mother animals in general, will sacrifice themselves for their children. So why doesn't the mother flee? Her heart won't let her. Her heart won't let her. The Bible gives us pictures. It shows us many different mothers, and we've talked about many of these in the past. One of the most famous, of course, is Mary, the mother of Jesus. And Mary is a woman who is given an amazing bit of news that she's going to have a child, even though she's never known a man before. And this child is going to be the child of God. And she accepts this, and she raises Jesus, and she stands by Jesus all the way through, even to his death on the cross. And then you see Hannah, a woman who didn't have a child and wanted so desperately to have a child. And God granted her Samuel. But she also had dedicated Samuel to God to give her boy back. And she honored that promise of taking her child and giving her to someone even greater than herself, of course, God. Sometimes we don't look at these mothers as much, but what about the widow of Zarephath? The widow of Zarephath, when Elijah encounters her and asks for some water and then also a piece of bread, she says, well, what can I give you, basically? Because she's taken the very last bit of her flour with some oil to bake some bread so she and her son can eat it and then die together. She has nothing left. And yet she's willing to take what she's got and save it for her son so that she and her son can go together. And then later on, when her son gets sick and things, it's to who does she go to? She goes back to God, to the man of God, Elijah, for help, because she's willing to put that trust in God to heal her son. A very similar story is the Shunammite. And in the case with Elisha, the Shunammite woman was promised this child, and she told Elisha, don't mislead me. Don't get my hopes up. And yet God blessed her with a son. But when he dies, then she doesn't give up. She goes herself. She saddles her donkey. She goes herself to Elisha. And even though he tries to send his servant and his staff and other things, she clings to him and won't let go until he comes, because she knows that he's got the ear of God, basically. And she knows that this is the hope she has for her son. She is willing to go all the way out for her son. But these pictures that we see in the Bible, they're snapshots at best. We don't see the whole picture. We just see episodes here and there. We don't get the whole story. You see, because completely defining the perfect mother is pretty much impossible. How do we go about doing it? Because there's too many variables. Women are gifted with children, and those children are different, and the mother adapts. And it's like God, of course, in his divine wisdom, pairs them. So the good mother is able to raise her child in the way that child should be raised, because the woman has very unique qualities to be able to deal with her own child. A good mother has her own unique abilities, her own unique qualities. However, good mothers often share some very common traits. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to be looking at an intimidating portrait, though. An intimidating portrait. And the women out there who are very familiar with the Bible are already groaning because they know where we're going with this. We're going to be looking at the Proverbs 31 woman. And on Mother's Day around the world, oftentimes, the Proverbs 31 woman is used a lot of times to talk about the perfect wife and mother. But oftentimes it can be very disconcerting for some women. They feel uncomfortable because even though this woman is described in only 21 verses, entire books have been written on her and about the impact a woman like this can have. And what we see here is in Proverbs 31, we see the complementary roles of wife and mother, both working alongside each other. And the reason for that is quite frankly, in a family structure, when a woman is ministering to and blessing her husband, the children are also influenced by that. They see that role model and they are encouraged and they are strengthened by what they see there. In the same way as a husband sees his wife blessing and providing and taking care of the children, he is in turn blessed. He in turn is encouraged, etc., because the loving wife and the loving mother's roles are intertwined. A little bit of background on the Proverbs 31 woman. First of all, this passage is an acrostic. And if you don't know what that term means, it means that in Hebrew, every single one, every verse begins with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet in order. So it would be like if verse 1 was A, it started with A, verse 2 starts with B, verse 3 starts with C, etc. And it's possible that the poem was designed that way so that it could be easily memorized, so that people could be able to keep track of it. As far as the author goes, it's a little bit of a question. See, the first part of chapter 31 is the words of Lemuel, King Lemuel of Massa. And we're not really sure who this guy was, if he even existed. It could have even been a pen name of Solomon, or it could have been maybe just an imaginary character that was created to like a literary device for this wisdom. People aren't sure because the only reference we have to this man is in the book of Proverbs. And it's possible that what comes next, because then the Proverbs 31 comes after that, about the Proverbs 31 woman, it's possible that Lemuel wrote this, or it's very possible that Solomon wrote this. We're really not quite sure. The placement, though, of this is at the end of the book of Proverbs. It's they are the last 21 verses in the book of Proverbs. So they form sort of an epilogue for the book of Proverbs. But one really important thing to remember here, this is not a specific woman. The Proverbs 31 woman is a cultural ideal. And as we read it, and as we look through it, you're going to see cultural distinctives of what the people of the time, how they saw the perfect wife and mother, how they held this up culturally of what this woman would be. So you might say, well, then why is it important for us to look at it? It's because the traits there in the cultural ideal are still traits that oftentimes we can see and apply to women in our days, wives and mothers as well. An ideal, the best way that I can maybe draw an analogy here is we have an ideal as well. We all want to be like Christ, or at least we should be as Christians. That is the ideal. And yet, quite frankly, as we live our lives, we may become more and more Christ-like. But will we ever be perfect like Christ was? Well, not this side of heaven. but we can continually strive for it. We continually try to be more and more Christ-like. In the same manner, women can strive to be more like the ideal that is presented here, not necessarily feeling bad, or shouldn't feel bad if they don't achieve some of these ideal traits. And once again, every woman is unique and they have their own different spin on these kinds of things. But I think as you're going to see, these traits are not just ones that are ideal for women, but many of the traits that are shown here in Proverbs 31 are also Christ-like traits. They're traits that all of us in many ways should be striving for. The thing is our inability to consistently reach the ideal of anything like this must not paralyze us. We must not look at something like, oh, to be like Christ, well, I'll never measure up, and not try for it. Or to look at some of the ideas in Proverbs 31 and say, well, that's impossible. No woman can ever reach those things. The thing is to continually be moving closer to, as God leads, to be more and more what he's calling us to be. So what are these traits? What are these, as Proverbs 31 puts it, the traits of the ideal wife and mother? Proverbs 31:10 says, a wife of noble character, who can find? Which once again kind of leads us back to the idea of this is an ideal, right? A wife of a noble character, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. In other words, the trait that we can see here is this woman is invaluable. And I can guarantee when I think of my mother or my mother-in-law or my wife, all three were invaluable, are invaluable. There's no way that I could put any price on them. You know, some cultures, and in this one, there was what was known as the bride price. And so when they're talking about, value, like far more than rubies, there's also in the mind of the readers there, the idea of the bride price. When a person wanted to get married, they would go into a contract basically with the bride-to-be's family. And they would, offer up maybe a certain amount of sheep, maybe some money and different things like that to basically give to the family in exchange for the bride. And this is still practiced in some cultures. I remember in Africa, I was once offered, I think it was like 2 cows for my oldest daughter by some guy. It was, it took me by surprise, but it was one of those things that I understood that in the culture, that was sort of how they did things. But Proverbs 31:10 says that this wife of noble character, she's worth far more than rubies. In other words, she is invaluable. And a woman of noble character like this, they are invaluable. Proverbs 31:11 goes on to say, her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing of value. If we were to assign a trait to that, we would say that this woman is trustworthy. And as I said, these traits that we're talking about, they don't just apply to women, do they? All of us need to be trustworthy. All of us need to be people that can be trusted. But a wife and a mother who is trustworthy is an invaluable partner in life. It says her husband has full confidence in her, lacks nothing of value. He can trust her with everything. When we were in Africa, and you will notice that a lot of these illustrations I'm going to use deal with my mother or my mother-in-law or my wife, because quite frankly, those are the women that I know the best. And who I have seen exhibit so many of these traits. But for example, when we were in Africa, back in the late 80s, it was really difficult. That was before the internet. This was before The communication was easy back and forth between countries. And so things like banking were really difficult. And my mother-in-law, Joyce's mom, really stepped up, and she took care of our finances. She took care of our bank account. She was a signatory on. She was on the checks. Um, she could have robbed us blind, but there was no way she would do that. She was trustworthy, and we knew that. And she worked with the mission on our taxes. She took care of everything for us, taking away that burden. Someone that we could truly and completely trust in this matter. Proverbs 31:12 goes on to say that this woman of noble character, she brings him, her husband, good, not harm, all the days of her life. In other words, she's marked by goodness. She's the type of woman that doesn't do things designed to hurt somebody, hurt her husband. Instead, everything that she does is designed for his good, even if he doesn't like it. With Joyce and I, um, sometimes I can be a little thick-headed. Now, I know this comes as a surprise to people, but really, there are times that I go off half-cocked. I don't make the wisest decisions, etc. And my wife is there to kind of come alongside and say, no. And when she confronts me, when she argues with me sometimes about these things, I want to stick to my guns. I want to be stubborn, but I know that even though she's disagreeing with me, or even though she's telling me, well, you need to take your medicine now, and I don't want to take my medicine, you know, I know that what she's not doing it to harm me. She's doing it because she loves me, and she's always seeking my good. I often talk about our relationship as like I'm a balloon that sometimes is trying to float away, and she's the hand that's holding the string, keeping me from flying off someplace. Proverbs 31:13 tells us that this woman, she selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. So if we were to bring that into a modern day trait, we would say that basically she's industrious. Back when Snow White came out, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, you remember that if you ever saw the old movie, the dwarves had this song that they sung, "Whistle While You Work." And there's a lot of wisdom in that little song. It's the idea of that you got to work, but why not do it with a great attitude? Why not do it with eagerness? Why not approach what you have to do in life, not with dread, but instead with, I'm going to do the very best job I can. I am going to work at this. I'm going to work at it eagerly, because any job worth doing is worth doing well. And that's what we see in our wives and mothers, that are ones we really see that are of noble character, that are really the good wives and mothers. These are the ones that they're industrious. Life is drudgery a lot of times. Yeah, there's a lot of hard work in life, but they don't let that stop them. They still approach it oftentimes with a more positive attitude. Well, it needs to get done. We're just going to do it. Proverbs 31:14 says that she is like the merchant ships bringing her food from afar. Now, if you're just looking at this and you're thinking, how in the world is a woman like a merchant ship bringing her food from afar? I mean, if I was going to just look at that, I'm thinking, well, does that mean she's ordering stuff from, from Thailand or something like that? Spending all her money on all these, imported foods and things like that. But you need to understand a little bit about the context. Back then, merchant ships would go out to faraway ports, and they would gather goods, and they would gather them in bulk, and they would bring them back so they could be sold at usually a fairer price than if someone had to source them themselves. So it was actually what we would call thrifty. A woman who is thrifty is one who kind of looks outside of the box. She is one, a wife and a mother is a person who doesn't just, buy at one price or what's convenient. Oftentimes she manages the money well. I remember being very impressed when we would be on home assignment. One time my wife was part of a co-op, and if you know what one of these are, in this case, it was a bunch of ladies got together and they would buy goods, groceries, toiletries, things like that in bulk. And then they would get a cheaper price for that. And then they would use their pooled money and they would divide it out among themselves so that actually each family was paying less for things that they would normally get at the grocery store than they would have to buy if they were just buying them retail, because they were buying them wholesale. And we saved a lot of money that way. I remember back in those days too, my wife used to use a lot of coupons, and she would go to the store and sometimes, the bill would be at the grocery store maybe $50 and something, and she may be only paying 20 or 10 for what we were getting. But we don't use coupons as much anymore because we don't necessarily always buy the brand names and things like that are there. But my wife is still extremely thrifty in the way that she buys, and I'm sure that a lot of your mothers or your wives are the same way. They're not just tossing their money out there. They're not just, always doing impulse buying, but instead they think it through. They look at the budget and they're thrifty. And a woman like this is invaluable, very much a necessary uh, partner in a marriage. Proverbs 31:15 goes on. It says, she gets up while it's still night. She provides food for her family and portions for her female servants. Now, most of us don't have servants, and this is very much in the culture. But I want you to look at the thought, the trait behind here, which is a person who places the needs of others first. Now, obviously, this is a Christ-like trait, placing the needs of others first. And that is something that we see the wife of noble character, the the mothers that I've known, and my wife, that's what we see, where they place the needs of others before themselves. But what is really cool about this is that placing the needs of others first is a profound witness also to her family. I have seen this attitude of my wife take fruit in my children, where they also look at putting the needs of their siblings oftentimes first. Are they perfect? Are any of us perfect? No, of course not. But that pattern that we see, the pattern that is repeated, bears fruit. Proverbs 31:16. She considers a field and buys it. Out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard. In other words, she takes initiative. In the story of, there's lots of stories about stewards in the Bible and the good steward. And in one of the most famous ones, you see that where Jesus tells this parable of a man who leaves and puts his servants in charge of his affairs. And he gives one a certain amount of talents, another a certain amount of talents, and finally one, and he gives only one talent. And you know the story, the one who has only one talent, he just buries it in the ground, doesn't do anything, which is a terrible use of the talent. But the other two, they take their money and their master's money and they invest it and they make more money with it. They use it in a way that it basically doubles it. Then, and a good wife and mother takes initiative. She may not go out and buy a field or plant a vineyard, But what she is doing is taking initiative. Proverbs 31:17 says, she sets about her work vigorously, and her arms are strong for her tasks. In other words, she's an energetic worker. She's a person who approaches what she does not with a lackadaisical attitude, not with a, oh, whatever, but she actually, uses some elbow grease. She gets in there, she gets the job done. And through this, she communicates a good work ethic to her children. And once again, I've seen the fruit of that in my own family. How my wife's good work ethic, her energy when she works, and her commitment to that has helped foster a good work ethic in my children. Proverbs 31:18. She sees that her trading is profitable and her lamp does not go out at night. In other words, she's good with money. And it goes back to what we talked about with the stewardship a while ago. We live in what could maybe be called the United States of debt. We have so many people, so many families in debt these days. People see what they want and they don't think about the fact that I've got to pay for this one of these days. And they just buy it. Now, don't get me wrong. There are a lot of people out there that they're in debt because they've had medical bills, they've had crises after crisis, and it just happens. Sometimes that happens. But there's a lot of debt out there that's preventable. One of the things I've always appreciated about our church is that we take our fiscal responsibility very, very seriously. And, we work hard to stay out of debt. I mean, we recently built a building that is over $1.5 million, and it's now paid for because of fiscal responsibility. Well, that's on a corporate level, but it needs also to be on an individual level. And when you see a person who is good with money, who is responsible in the way they handle money, that's a godsend. And that's what many of our wives and mothers are. Proverbs 31:19. In her hand she holds the distaff and grasps the spindle with her fingers. Well, these are words that we don't use anymore. Basically, it's all about weaving and putting together cloth. But the trait that we can get out of here is this: she's not too good for domestic chores. Oftentimes, as you saw earlier, people would have servants. Well, this is not necessarily an easy task, and it's one that you can just give to the servant. Let the servant do it, right? But a woman of noble character, a wife and a mother of noble character, she's not too good for it. And that right there is a Christ-like trait. Remember Christ washing the disciples' feet. This was a dirty job. This was a job that was given to the lowest of servants. And yet Christ himself got down and washed his disciples' feet. He took on the servant attitude because he was proclaiming he wasn't too good for this. And that if you really want to serve serve mankind, you have to really serve mankind. You don't serve from above, you serve from below. You take on the dirty jobs, the wiping the noses or wiping other parts of the body, of your child. You take doing the dirty dishes. You take doing the different kinds of things that other people may not want to do. You do those because they need to be done. And you're proving that, you're not too good for those either. Proverbs 31:20. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. In other words, she helps those in need. In Senegal, we had a lot of talibés. Talibés, and I've talked to you before, the talibés are young boys that are taken from their homes usually from the villages. Their parents send them off for a supposedly better life, a training under a religious leader, a marabu. Um, but what actually happens in the big cities is these talibés, they are enrolled in this dara, this school, basically, where the marabu is the teacher, but part of his instruction is basically to turn them into beggars. And he dresses them in rags and he gives them tomato soup cans, and they go out and they have to beg any passersby on the street, or go between the cars, etc., and bring home money. And if they don't bring in home enough money, the marabu beats them. It's a terrible, terrible system. And we've seen children, boys that are just, their heads are, all scabies and everything else, and their arms have sores all over them, and just terrible things. And I was on the board of a ministry to Talibés, in which we had a Talibé center, and there were a lot of women who would volunteer in there. And the kids, we couldn't take them out of this terrible situation because legally they were, their parents had put them in it. But we could, when they weren't on the streets, they could come to the center, and there the ladies would bathe them. They would put ointment on their head and on their wounds. They would bandage them up. They would give them breakfast. They would love them. They'd be moms to them when they were so far away from their mothers. It was an amazing ministry. In our neighborhood, we had a lot of guards, our personal guards outside of our house, because in Senegal, we needed guards, and all the houses had guards. And one of the things I always noticed is that the guards, if they needed something, they came to Joyce. It was like they didn't come to me. They would knock on the door and say, "Is your wife home?" You know, they would want to see her because they knew instinctively that she would care for them when they were in need. I've seen my mom and other ladies too, when somebody in the neighborhood was in need, they would fill grocery bags with groceries, and they would knock on a door and leave the groceries and go away, not necessarily wanting to be seen, but wanting the people to still be cared for. People who help those in need, that's a tremendous trait that our wives and mothers can have. Proverbs 31:21 says, "When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet." Now, scarlet here is not necessarily the color, but basically it means that the clothing is of high quality. It's probably wool. It's something that would keep them warm, keep them safe during this time. Basically, what it means is the wife and mother has the foresight to provide for the family's needs. Joyce had, I call it Joyce's pharmacy. But in Africa, the guards, one of the things when they would come, they would come for basically medical help. If they couldn't necessarily afford to go get antibiotics or to go to a doctor or something like that, but they'd come to Joyce, and they always knew that, if they had a headache, Joyce had aspirin or something similar to that, some Tylenol, something for them. Joyce would have antibiotic, if they cut their arm or something like that, she'd have antibiotic to put on there, and the bandages to put on their wounds, etc. She was there with all of those provisions. And I've never known her to run out of her pharmacy, even today. If the kids get sick or something, they don't come to me, Dad, what should I take? They go to their mom because they know that mom's pharmacy is open 24/7. Because she always, she may not have all the drugs that you're going to find, that are at a normal pharmacy, but she has homeopathics and other kinds of things that can still meet daily needs like that, because she's had the foresight all the time that I've known her to provide for the family's needs in this way. Proverbs 31:22 says, she makes coverings for her bed, and she is clothed in fine linen and purple. Basically, what that is talking about is that this is a woman who is concerned about the extra touches. In other words, not just making the cake, but making sure the icing's okay too. When our kids were younger, and still sometimes today, they would ask for birthday cakes, special birthday cakes, and they would come up with, like a dinosaur cake, or I want an island, a desert island, but the desert island has to have a volcano, and you have to have the ocean surrounding it, and all that. And their mom would come up with it. She would make this cake, and you'd have the little volcano there, and they have the lava coming down, and you have palm trees and the water and the fish in the water. And I'm always blown away, and we take pictures of them, but it was that extra touch. Not just, hey, yeah, I'll buy you a sheet cake from Walmart. No, this was the extra touch to make sure that things were just a little bit extra special. 31:23 says, her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. In other words, she cares for her husband. She cares for his physical needs, his emotional needs. She lifts him up. There's a saying that behind every great man is a woman. And I got to admit, in my experience, what I've seen is that behind every great man out there, there is usually a loving mom, a loving wife, or both. Proverbs 31:24 says, she makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies the merchants with sashes. In other words, she adds to the family income. Now, don't get me wrong. That doesn't mean that if a woman is not out at another job or has some work at home business, that somehow she's failing. Many women contribute to the family in ways that still enable her husband to be able to make more money, etc., because they take care of also so many different kinds of things. The idea here, though, is it's not about me, but it's about us as a family. I see couples out there that sometimes it's like, well, yeah, I make my money and she makes her money, and but that's really not how it's supposed to be in a family. It's supposed to be all of us working together, and a wonderful wife and a wonderful mother sees that it's not about her, but it's about the bigger picture. It's about the family. And once again, that's an attitude that shouldn't just be shared with the wife and the mother. That should be the husband and father's attitude too. Proverbs 31:25 says, she is clothed with strength and dignity, and she can laugh at the days to come. She's confident, but she's not haughty. There's a big difference. And I think that the only way that it can really come about is from a reliance on God. A person can be confident, but when their confidence is based not in themselves, but on the God they serve, that comes out, that is expressed in their lifestyle. And it's one of the things that is most attractive about my wife, is that her confidence is in God and not in herself. Proverbs 31:26, she speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. In other words, she's not a frivolous speaker. She's not a woman that is just always talking about whatever, just to be talking. My mother-in-law, Mary Huffaker, my wife loves to tell this story, and it's one of the things that, knowing her for so many years, I believe it Absolutely, because I've seen it played out in other things. But she was a woman, she wasn't taciturn. In other words, it wasn't like she never talked. But when she talked, she always said things that were either important or they were things that were necessary. They were things that really communicated something. They weren't just empty words. And she would sometimes go to church meetings that the church meetings would be very contentious. You may people be arguing this point or that point or whatever. But if Mary Huffaker stood up to speak, the room got quiet because they knew from experience that if she spoke, she'd be speaking something important. She'd be communicating from the wisdom that she got as a faithful woman of God. Proverbs 31:27 says, she watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. In other words, she's not lazy, she's a good manager, and she's diligent. Behind the majority of successful and well-adjusted people you hear about, there's usually a loving and a hardworking mom. There's someone who, from the background, has always been there. You hear these stories about mom worked extra hours, mom did this, mom did that. Always, always, always taking care of her household, making sure the kids had enough to eat, even when money was tight, making sure that they had clothing, making sure they did their homework, making sure that all of this was taken care of. That's an invaluable trait to have. Proverbs 31:28 and 29 are paired because it says, her children arise and call her blessed, her husband also, and he praises her by saying, many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. And what we can get from this is this: her family praises her. Her family understands what a blessing she is to them. But what is tragic is when this doesn't occur. And too many times you see in families, today at least, where families don't recognize what they've got. They don't realize the gift that God has given them. And instead they take their wives or their mothers for granted. Husbands, honor your wives. Do you understand what a blessing you've been given? Do you understand the gift of God to you to have a godly woman, to have a godly companion through life? Children, honor your mothers. I mean, think of what your mother does for you. Think of how she sacrificed. Think of the love and the nights she spent up with you when you were sick, etc. Children, don't take your mother just as a piece of the furniture. Love her. We must all give honor where it's due, and our wives and mothers deserve our extreme respect. Proverbs 31:30 says, charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. And this has to be the most significant verse in the passage. Because, yeah, women can be charming, they're beautiful, but we have to understand that all goes away. But a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. What we see here is the right priorities. A woman understands that she may not always be drop dead gorgeous, at least physically, but she's gorgeous inside because she fears the Lord and because he is working in her heart to make her into the most beautiful person possible. And her faith influences her family. See, all women share in the image of God. We learn in Genesis 1:27 that all of humankind is made in the image of God. But the ones who know and follow him, both men and women, have the advantage. And then finally, Proverbs 31:31 says this: honor her for all that her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gates. In other words, she should receive the honor she is due, both privately in the home, but also publicly. The city gate was a place in ancient Israel where all business was conducted in. The elders, anything important that had to be discussed that people needed to know about, was done in the city gate. And by saying, let her works bring her praise at the city gate, what the writer of Proverbs is saying here is that she needs to receive the praise that she is due publicly. Her family needs to make sure that happens. She needs to be honored for who she is and what she's done. May we never neglect to honor our wives and mothers. So some final thoughts on this. Motherhood is an honorable profession that should never be taken for granted or seen as somehow less important. Sometimes we think, well, a woman, she has to have this amazing career out there or something like that. And motherhood is sometimes put to the side. But motherhood itself is an honorable profession. Yeah, I would argue in some ways the most honorable profession. And it should never be taken for granted or seen as somehow less important. We should love, cherish, and encourage our mothers because they have the power to change the world. Let's pray. Father God, thank you for our mothers. Thank you for the blessing that they've given us. And thank you that our mothers have helped us become who we are today. Help us to show them honor and respect. Help us to appreciate them. Help us to, first of all, thank you for providing them to us. And may we encourage our wives and our mothers to continually draw you and to be all they can be, to never look at their position as somehow not as important, but to see it as vital. One of, if not the most honorable profession in life. Help us, Lord, to truly lift them up, both publicly and privately, and to give honor where honor is due. So thank you for moms. In Christ's name, amen. Well, we come to our normal time of tithes and offerings, and as usual, you have options. The easiest way, of course, is Zella, as we've talked about, through your bank, and just send your email, set it up so that you can give your tithe that way. Another way is Venmo, of course, for those of you who do that. And as always, you can do the snail mail thing and mail your check in. Either one, any of these are good options as you continue to support this ministry. And may God bless our mothers. And may we be a blessing to them. Amen.